You have now arrived at your destination.
Tarek, I've heard so many good things. We met before through obviously Alex at Deal, but then I spoke to Alfred at Sequoia, I spoke to Shreyas, who I had on the show, I spoke to Ali Partovi. I feel like I know you incredibly well already. Thank you so much for joining me first, Tarek.
Super excited. Really excited to do this. It's gonna be
This will
fun.
be a great conversation. So I want to start with a little bit on you. So tell me, how did you make your way into the world of startups first? And brilliant clicking of the fingers there. And then how did you come to found Kalshi most recently?
Luan and I, we're not the type of people in school that were sort of like tinkering with a bunch of products and trying a bunch of different projects. Where like, you always had this sort of like clique that is just like, oh, we're like we want to be entrepreneurs and we're gonna be entrepreneurial and we're trying a bunch of different things until you find something that maybe works and kind of go with it. So that wasn't us. We were pretty convinced that we're going into um, finance. I was gonna be a trader. My chart was gonna be Citadel or kind of one of the quant funds. And I would say it's one of those examples where the idea drove us like out of our path to basically it just sort of like attracted us to itself to basically go and build it. And so, I'll give you a little bit of background, but I'm originally from Lebanon, and I show up to MIT, and when I got to MIT, in Lebanon I was like the math nerd. I was really really smart, really good at school. When I get to MIT, it's like holy shit, like I'm actually at the very most pretty average. Uh, and I got like super pumped. I was like, holy shit, like I have to, outwork everyone. I need to beat everyone. And then the thing that became kind of okay, like what do I need to do next is like I need to go to Goldman because that was the cool thing to do at the time. I go to Goldman and I like, I loved it. I was just, everything about it. And not necessarily Goldman, I just like loved trading. And then I found myself at night, everyone was kind of thinking about, how do we trade this and how do we pitch this to a client? And, I was in this kind of thing called equity exotics desk where you bundle exotics and sell them to clients. And I wasn't thinking about how do we trade them. I was thinking, why on earth are we even trading these things? I mean, we did these things in 2016 where people wanted to hedge themselves against Brexit or get exposure to Brexit. And what we would do is like we would take a bunch of option swaps, put them in one bundle, and then sell it to investors and sell it as a good proxy for what they're actually looking for, and then sell it for 40% premiums. I was like, how is anyone even buying this? And that question was seeded. It was like, why is there no exchange where you can just trade directly on events? And then after that, it was just, it went all downhill where every single interaction I had with a person, I would think about it. It's like, oh, people, are making a forecast about the future. They're speculating or they're like, worried about a certain future event. And then it was similar with Luana until we're like, okay, we need to build this. I don't think we're going to be able to live with ourselves if we don't build this. And so, yeah, that's how we got into Kalshi and the startup world
So I want to break a
concurrently.
couple of bits down there. One, I love that as kind of an idea origination, but I want to break. You mentioned kind of coming from Lebanon, being the maths nerd. I think everyone, and this is such a deep first question, so glad it's not a first date.
Yeah,
We're all a product of our history. What are you running from,
I
and what
agree.
are you running towards, Tarek?
It's a great question, actually. I've never been asked that on a podcast. Um, um, yeah, we can be transparent. I think, personally, I think it just like tends to be very related to parents,
Yeah.
generally. Parents just have like a very big impact on you growing up. And I think um, what I think, and this is sort of through my own introspection now, is one, I grew up without really, my dad was really absent. And I think there was this kind of constant, I would say that created a constant need of like, where is he and what's going on and why is he not there? And then two, my mom was just like an extremely, and I kind of attributed a lot of things to her. She was an extremely kind of strict, she was a great parent, but she was very strict when it came to excellence.
Hmm.
It was truly one of those things where like you come back and you're excited about, having achieved 98% and she is just focused on the 2%. She was like, where is that 2%? And I think she just like would push us to be at 120% of the way every single day. Like the 120% was very consistent. Everything we did, it's like you want to go play soccer, you have to do it at 120%. You want to go skiing, you need to do that. You know, at school, you need to be at 120%. I think that drive and that sort of need for 120%, that doesn't leave you. You don't,
Can
leave
I
your
ask?
parents' house and yeah.
And your mother, I'm sure, is not a subscriber, as much as I would like it to be as big a show as that.
I'll
Do you
send it to
think
her.
do you think that's good parenting? And when you think about leadership today, I often think actually about, parenting as being kind of a core tenet of being a great leader and the right way to teach people. Like, do you think it's good parenting, and do you take anything from that in terms of teaching your team?
I think it's a great question, honestly. I mean, I don't know. I'm far from being a parent still, but I just think it depends on the circumstances. Like, I'm very grateful for it. I am where I am largely because of it.
Mhm.
And otherwise I would be kind of another person that just, went to school in Lebanon and is, maybe, doing something like a lot of my other friends in Lebanon, nothing kind of that meaningful. Not that all my friends are, I have some friends that are doing amazing things, but um, and I think if you want to achieve outlier results, you need some sort of outlier. I'm going to call it imbalance. You need some sort of outlier, unusual uh, thing that is part of your history. It could be your upbringing. It could be some, a big shock that happened, something. And I'm not trying to make a kind of fully generalistic statement, but I think there's a strong correlation between those two things.
I totally agree. I mean, listen, how old are you, Tarek?
I'm 26.
Okay, you're 26, I'm 26 too. Okay, we've both done relatively exceptional things for our age if we're going to inflate our own egos enough. But I think we've both given up a huge amount of life that other 26-year-olds have not. And I think going to your question on balance, I fundamentally do not believe you get to where we get to unless you give up and sacrifice. I'm sorry, you can't have both worlds in my mind. I want to hear your thoughts on the balanced life. If one's going to operate at this level, can one truly be balanced? And how do you think about this?
I think that's a great question. So I think the analogy I always like to give is, have you played FIFA or do you play FIFA?
I used to play it a lot when I was younger, but it's been a
I used
while.
to play a lot. I used to play a lot, but one thing that was interesting in FIFA is, how when you like were picking your players and you want to substitute them, they show you this kind of like I don't know what you call these, like a chart where you have different attributes like speed, dribbling,
Sure.
shooting, and then you have players that are balanced. You have players like Messi, which are like low on everything but dribbling. They're just like so outlier. And I think founders tend to have one category where they're extremely spiked, and a lot of other categories where they're just like really abysmal. And founders that basically find that something to build or something to do that really heavily uses that attribute where they spike end up achieving these outlier results. I think that's sort of the framework that I use. Um, and the reason I say this is because like a startup is intrinsically something that the world does not want to exist. Sounds like a counterintuitive statement, but actually, to me, it's an intuitive statement. Like the world does not want your startup to exist. The default state, the de facto state, is for your startup to just not be. There's usually in any kind of market you're ever gonna go, it's either there's a shit ton of competitors, thus, the pressure is for your startup not to exist, or there's no one in that market, which means there's something wrong in that market. Right? It's like no free lunch theorem, but
Okay,
um,
but I'll pose a different view. Okay, let's have a
yeah,
debate. Yours,
I like it.
it's not that there's a ton of competitors, and it's not that there's a problem in your market. It's just you foresaw something in your market that other people did not see. You saw an expansion of financial products that people wanted to bet on that other people did not see. Market creation through kind of mindset innovation. I always ask, like, what do you see that the world does not see? And so I think yours sits in the middle. No.
I love that, but there's one thing. I do think it sits in the second category because regulatory wise, it wasn't allowed,
Yeah.
right? So, then you're in a situation where, like, anyone with a reasonable, I think we were naive and honestly pretty nuts, 3 4 years, like 3 years ago. Anyone with a reasonable mind would be like, okay, we're not going to go and try. I mean, it's not allowed. The government does not allow this. And it's been decades of people trying it. I think we're persistent and stubborn enough to just make it happen. And I think this is where sort of that spike helped us achieve this sort of outlier outcome regulatory wise, where even companies like CME, who's been there since 1848, hasn't been able to achieve, right? And so I would still put it in category number two. And again, the point I'm trying to say is like you need to have like an outlier attribute that allows you to pierce through a specific market and pierce through kind of all these external pressures that want your startup to die.
So, do you believe in work-life balance? And for those
I
today that are
don't.
because
Yeah, I mean, the law of equal exchange. It's just like, you're if you want to achieve something out loud, you're going to have to work like a variety of different things. I think there's like a lot of the work smart type thing. I mean, I think sure you should work smart, but that's conditioned on you working hard first. Like you don't just show up and start working smart. You need to work very hard first, and then you can figure out how to optimize maybe your workday and work smarter. But you just need to work very hard to achieve a lot of results. I mean, I just don't see any way around it.
Have
You know,
you
we can.
changed? Have you changed how you work over the years? What I mean by that is like, now I actually take very few calls. I hate calls, and I try and do everything by email. Actually, have teams that obviously help me with email now as well. But how I actually work has changed a lot. Has your style of work changed?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think you know, when I first started Kalshi, it was fully brute force. It was just outright, there's no process, no system, nothing. And same with my co-founder Luana. It was just 100% brute force, where it's like, oh, we need to do this. We're gonna pull three all-nighters, and we do it. And then we just like constantly brute force, brute force, brute force. It got to a point where like physically, it was really taxing, and I got to a point where it's become very, very, very tiring. And I would still do that now if I'm convinced that it's the right thing. But now, as I'm kind of starting to see, okay, like the company has grown, the company has matured. I think now, I think my role, like, it's going to be the cliche thing where you need to delegate a little bit more, you need to do a variety of different things. But like, there's just so many things to do in a day. Like, there's so many things to do that if you just brute force to it, it just does not become the optimal solution. I do think it was the optimal solution when you're first starting a company, but right now it's like if you don't actually pause, and I'll give a first step, which is like first you can just like throw yourself into work and then do it. Now at the very least I pause and I prioritize before. And if you don't do that prioritization thing, the brute force thing is a greedy algorithm. You're just taking whatever comes before you and then you solve it. I think pausing and prioritizing is pretty important. So I think that's one thing that yeah.
Can I interrupt you and say, at that
Yeah.
moment of prioritize, how do you determine what your next step is? Is it we will lose $10,000 if we do this? Is it we'll lose 2 weeks of engineering? How do you determine what dictates your next step?
That's a great question. Um, I don't have the unifying key yet. I don't want to overstate it. I love Elon's, which is like, does this get us to Mars faster? And I think that's really cool. But I think broadly speaking, if I were to kind of distill it into one or two things, um, it is usually around um, expanding the category somehow, which is still kind of the same thinking as what we had initially when we started the company, which is like, okay, we have this ecosystem that's events. And the way I view the event ecosystem is, you have stocks, right? You have, futures like grain futures, then it became metal and oil futures like tangible commodities. Then you got intangible like interest rate swaps, which is a $500 trillion market now. And then you have events, which is this idea of commoditizing anything. I just constantly, my mind is always going into like the ecosystem. It's not number of users, it's not revenue, it's not financials. Is this next step basically helping us bring more people into the ecosystem or expand the ecosystem, bring in a new market, bringing something else? And I just feel, and the reason I think about the ecosystem, not the company Kalshi, is because right now we're the only ones. I mean, we basically pierce this regulatory thing and we have pretty strong regulatory moats. But I just want this. I'm very focused on this asset class becoming as big as crypto and then stocks and something else over time. And that's really kind of the framework. It's like, am I expanding the asset class? And if I'm expanding the asset class, everything will trickle down afterwards.
I totally agree with you. You mentioned the regulatory moats that you have, and also kind of the kind of crazy nature of going after them. Some would say it's naive when you started, and naivety is often posited as a superpower. I'm intrigued. Do you think of naivety today as a superpower, or do you actually think of experience as incredibly helpful and poignant?
It's a very interesting story. I mean, like, sometimes being naive can just lead you to disasters, and it does often. There's just a kind of a healthy mix. I remember I had a conversation with Justin Mateen, the founder of Tinder, when he first, we so he came in late to our seed round, and then we had like I think a 5 minute conversation. He said, "I want to invest. I want to do the whole round." I was like, "Okay, you can do the whole round. You can do maybe I'll see how much." He's like, "As much as I can. I really want to do it." Then we did it, and then like I think a month later, I just called him and I was like, Justin, like, you talked to me for 5 minutes. I think you barely understood the business. and you know, what was that? And then he basically, you know, he was very clear. And I think, by the way, Justin has an incredible early stage track record. I don't know if you knew that, but it was just phenomenal. He just, you know, so, and he said, like, there's two things that were there. It's like, you're really smart. Like, you know what you're talking about. You're smart. There's like that precondition that you're smart. You're gonna figure something out, and then you're extremely naive. Um, and he says that that combo is usually like very strong. You know, if you're naive and you don't really know what you're talking about, then it's bad. If you're very smart and you're naive, the naivete is not coming from like a lack of understanding or of deep thinking. It's coming from a lack of experience, right? And those two types of naivetes are different. Like lack of understanding and lack of deep thinking, that's bad. Lack of experience tends to be very good because experience, what it does is like you can learn it. If you have high slopes, you can learn experience, but you're also not carrying all the baggage and sadness and difficulties of life or any industry if you're in startups. But yeah.
Carrying the baggage of life. I totally agree with you. Does that impact how you hire? Like, do you look for these high slope, high gradient, like learning machines, but who are very young? Or do you actually look to complement, no offense, your lack of experience with 45-year-old logoed execs?
I think regulatory wise, definitely the latter.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'll tell you from the, you know, our first person in the company was Jeff Banman, who's actually pretty publicized now, which was really cool. I love that. But Jeff, you know, is the only lawyer that basically took up our kind of like case at the time, and he was ex CFTC. He knew everyone. He kind of knows the ins and outs. He knows kind of how it works. And I think that complement of us with this ridiculous drive and Jeff's wisdom and experience and knowledge of the space kind of ends up creating a very strong combo. Now, I have to say, we tend to try to focus on people with a lot of experience and wisdom that still, I mean, I don't mean that, I really mean this in a good way, that still have a little bit of like, I call it like the childish fascination aspect. And there's a lot of those people. There's a lot of people that like, you know, feel like they've got it figured out and now I have my wisdom and experience. And then other people, and you know, they could be, you know, at the end of they could have retired already, but they constantly have this sort of childish fascination with new things. Like with, oh, what is this? Or what is this like new crypto thing? Or what is this like? And I think those types of people are like tend to be extremely good people to have in an organization.
Yeah,
Uh,
the lesson that I have is I like people who need to make it happen. There are people who want to make it happen and they want to see Kalshi succeed. And then there are others who fucking need to make it happen. And the ones that need to make it happen do the 3 all-nighters in a row and get it done. And the ones that want to are motivated on Monday and tired on Friday. And that's a big lesson that I learned. When I was hiring for my fund, I could hire Galactico GPs or like fucking hustlers who may have more flaws, but a different kind of mindset around needing and wanting. So it's just something I learned. Man, have you made any terrible hiring mistakes? I've made many. What are your big hiring mistakes?
yeah, I mean, if I said no, I'd be lying. So, you know, I think the ones that tend to be difficult are the ones where I basically over-index, and especially when we first started on, you know, I'm a, you know, one I've always been very big admirers of raw intellect. You know, at MIT, I would really admire people that just, you know, can come and crank a piece of code at, you know, an order of magnitude less time than anyone else. And I think we over-indexed on this a little bit earlier on. I mean, I think it was really about like, okay, what are smartest people to get into the company? And I think we would put aside a little bit of the cultural aspects and you know whether this, you know, this person is adding positively to the culture, where this person can rally troops, whereas this person, you know, like a variety of kind of behavior. I think it sounds cliche, but I think as young founders, we definitely over-index on that, and I think that led to the worst. You know, I think the biggest sort of hiring mistakes. The one that tends to be particularly painful is self-awareness, I would say. Um, you know, I think like people who are not self-aware tend to be very difficult to manage, very difficult to talk to, even kind of like the exit tends to be painful as well. Kind of the whole thing tends to be. And so those are the ones I really kind of thinking back, I was like, okay, this was a big hiring mistake
Can I ask,
when a person was.
how long do you give people? This is another thing. I've always waited too long to let someone go, even when I know that it's not going to work. How long do you give people, and how do you know when to call it?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the feedback I received, and that's something I'm working on, is think I take too long. And you always have a gut as a founder. Like you have a gut, and you start considering, and then it takes too. I think it takes too long. I think something I'm working on. I think being able to do it better. It's also more fair to them, more fair to the company, more fair to everyone. And the reason I just think is it's always tough. I mean, it's just one of those things that everyone hates doing. And you carry them with you. I don't know if I definitely carry mine with me.
Yeah.
It's like, I always check in with everyone, and you always carry them with you. So it's a little bit one of those that, I take blame first essentially for these types of situations. It's like
So
always what did I do wrong? And see there.
what did you do wrong? You want the blame first?
I think so, always, because it's like, not saying what to do, but like what can I do better? It's really better question, which is like next time in the interview process, like what can be changed and what did we kind of miss flag, and I always look back. And two, in terms of like management, that we communicate expectations clearly enough, etc. Especially when there's a kind of disagreement when it happens. If everyone is aligned, it's like okay, that's fine. People kind of understood the reasoning. If people didn't understand the reasoning, then inevitably we did something wrong, right?
I totally get you. Can I ask, we've mentioned kind of mistakes in hiring and, maybe raw intellect, but lack of experience. When you think about like insecurities in leadership, what do you think your biggest insecurities in leadership are today?
So, just to make sure we're kind of agree on definition here, it's like we're talking about something that is not necessarily true, but I'm worried about.
Yeah.
Because which is what usually insecurity tends to be. Um, um,
So one of my insecurities is that maybe LPs would treat me younger because of my age. And I often ask, would they treat Alfred Lin like this? Would they treat Lee Fixel like this? And the answer is actually a reflection on myself, going back to the blame yourself. The truth is, I think often young people like us ask for permission, where Alfred Lin or Lee Fixel will say, LP, I'm doing this. I would like your support, whereas we ask for permission. Do you see that? So I'm kind of reflecting on myself, but the insecurity for me is the question of, oh, do they? Oh, am I put in that position? And that kind of questioning of myself in that way.
yeah, I'll talk about one. I mean, I think that tends to be true. I think it probably trickles down from a personal as well. So I think as a leader, there's something at the company. I always um, worry about like I'm more respected than liked, which oftentimes if you ask a lot of like founders, they say that's great. A lot of people prefer to be respected over liked, but I would say that's an insecurity of mine. So I sometimes think like, okay, maybe like it would be nice to be more liked. I think, for example, like the balance with Luan and I, like Luan is more liked in the organization, I would say, and so that's something that I think about.
Why do you think that is?
I think I tend to be harsh sometimes, and I'm a little bit like sometimes I describe it a little bit like as hyper rational, just like everything kind of, and
Do you want
I
to,
could
do you
be
want to
quite
change,
harsh and intense.
do you want to change that? Do you want to have more softness?
I,
And
I, I think I'm working on that. I mean, I think it's something I'm working on. And kind of working the balance. I don't want to reduce my intensity. That's not something I want to do. But at the same time, I think there's some things that can be mitigated and easily managed by like becoming softer or becoming kind of more intentional about communication or communicating things. And I think that's a positive thing.
do you struggle with your intensity in your personal life? Like my girlfriend now says, like it's exhausting being with you. Friday night, you're like intensely talking about hyperinflation or like whatever you're going to talk about, and I'm just like fucking tired and bored. Like it's intense all the time. Do you have trouble with that? I'm
I'm, de-
amazed
I'm de-
I
I
haven't got
I
that.
definitely relate to this. Yes, yes, yeah. It's just
But do
hard
you
to turn
want
it
to?
off.
But yeah,
It's
and
hard
do
to
you
turn it
even
off.
want to? You're like, because it makes you what you are.
I don't think I really want to. I mean, I don't. I don't. I mean, sometimes I'm like, maybe I should be just like a little bit more chill. I mean, but I am intense. If anyone like, it's like the description is always intense. So
Speaking of that
yeah,
intensity, Ali Partovi told me it was particularly that intensity that made you so good at hiring engineers. If we think about building that team of engineers that you have done so well, what do you think makes you so good at hiring engineers? And where do you think most founders make mistakes?
I would credit a lot of it to the vision more so than myself, to be honest. I just think we're building something pretty cool. Like, I think we're building something pretty awesome. Like if you think, it's like a new category. It is one of those really, long moonshot ideas. It's a mix of finance and tech. You see a lot of really smart people. They struggle with that balance between, Do I want to do finance, which is really cool and there's a lot of interesting problems to solve, or do I want to go build something, which is also really cool because I'm building something real concrete in the world? And Kalshi is the perfect combo of both, where you can do both. We're coming into everyone saying, how about you do both? You don't need to go to Jane Street, you don't need to go to Facebook. How about you, or Facebook is bad, but to a tech startup like B2B SaaS company, how about you merge the two? Here's Kalshi. And I think that tends to be really attractive as a value prop for an engineer that wants to solve really hard problems and build something meaningful. And then two, I think it just like compounds. I mean, I put a lot of time early on in like creating an interview process that is actually interesting, that people enjoy kind of going through. And I think that helped to create a little bit of virality around campuses because like, oh, this question at Kalshi is really fun, and how do you solve it? And can you solve it? And things like that. And I think that kind of trickles down and compounds. And then once you have a really like an amazing engineering team of really smart people, like that also attracts more, and you get sort of the compounding effect.
Pause. How do you structure that interview process, and how do you make it fun and different? Can we double click on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think the obviously it changed over time, but we try to limit the kind of algorithm interviews and all of that. We don't do many of those. We do everything. It's either one, it is something that we're actually tackling today in the exchange, and we put a lot of time to, okay, how can we scope it out so that they go through in the hour that they're talking to us a similar problem that we've gone through a month ago or today or something like that, and like let's collaborate on it so they have very direct exposure to kind of what's going on. And I think that's just exciting. Like it gives them a little bit of inside view on what's going on, inside look, etc. And then the second type is more, I don't know, I love these, a lot of people love these, but like kind of just like mathematically difficult, interesting problems. The question that we ask a lot is, and I don't know, maybe we're giving some trade secrets here, but we asked the question about, I guess I don't want to give away too much, but basically it has to do with an elephant, and it has to do with the mathematical constant pi, and the person has to relate these two somehow. It's a pretty tough mathematical problem, but it is a pretty elegant solution, and the whole thing, it's like, you start with an elephant, you end up with pi, and how's that even
Do you know what I
possible?
learned about? Do you know what I learned about giving away secrets? Is that actually, even when you give them away, no one will pick them up.
That's true. Look, I don't believe in startup secrets. Like, oh, I want to keep my idea secret. I never believed in that. Interview questions wise, yeah, I'm just trying to not to piss off our engineers because if I say it
Oh
here,
no,
everyone who's applying is gonna prepare for it beforehand.
I'm not pushing you in any way. I just
Yeah,
released a show which is like 10 secrets to building a media company. And the reason I felt so confident doing it was because I know that people won't do it. And so it's totally fine. You mentioned kind of, choosing working at Kalshi over a B2B, software company. When we spoke before, you said B2B is a Ponzi scheme. As generally an enterprise investor, my ears were pricked by this one. Why do you think that? And why is B2B SaaS a massive Ponzi scheme?
to be clear, I'm not saying, I want to be very clear. I think there's a lot of amazing B2B SaaS companies. As we all know, they built amazingly interesting products. I think, and all of them are very useful to the world. I think I'll kind of describe a little bit kind of how I view the ecosystem. I think there's a lot of that share. One of the things I like, SBF also tweeted about this thing recently. So the idea is like, one, I think there's going to be a lot of pain for B2B SaaS companies that are not solving a real need. That are solving something that is good to have. And I think that's the first thing that a lot of companies are going to cut. And I think that's going to be really difficult. But, at a high level, let's assume the whole ecosystem is two B2B SaaS companies and one VC. With a bunch of LPs. The VC basically, does $1 million round for each, does them to spend $1 million round selling to others very quickly. So they both sell to each other, they generate revenue. Because of that revenue, that same VC basically injects more money into them and tells them to repeat. So sell even more with grow even harder with all the money. So spend all that money really quickly, grow your revenue even faster. Revenue is still growing. Okay, now we're doing a Series B, we'll do a Series C, we'll do a Series D. And basically, like these companies, fundamentally, it's a circle of companies that are selling to each other pretty massively. Obviously, it's not two companies, it's thousands of companies with the same source, same pool of money coming from the top, which is essentially the ultimate LPs at the end. And so you basically got into a cycle where like growth has been fueled by injection of capital pretty consistently until you get the B, the C, the D, E, F, and then someone is holding the bag. The ones that succeed is basically the ones that go all the way to IPO, where like they dump it on retail investors, and retail investors are holding the bag. The ones that don't are the ones, that basically do a series E, F, and then that investor is the one that is left holding the bag when the tide shifts.
But do you not do you
Um,
not do you not believe in the explosion of market size? And what I mean by that is, I am in SMB CRM providers that sell to plumbers and sell to cleaning companies, and they're not in the circular economy of LP inflated ecosystems. They are in the national economy of labor and labor productivity, and those are the winners in my mind. When you have Dallas Ford Motor Company is your customer, that's a win.
I totally agree. I mean, totally agree on that point. I mean, and that's people are solving a real need. Ford is not going to buy it just because they're going to buy it, but within the ecosystem, which is what a lot of the companies that we've seen get built in the last decade, I would say, which are like very kind of startup heavy, like let's sell to each other and everyone's selling to each other. Obviously there's an explosion, but that's all kind of very VC fueled. It's not too dissimilar from crypto. There's a lot of fuel in crypto that went in, and there was like a lot of speculation. That doesn't mean that crypto is not, and a big chunk of crypto is not very meaningful. It's just the ecosystem is very hyper overinflated through a mechanism that is not too dissimilar to Ponzi schemes.
What would you like to change about venture? You come from a background in finance. You obviously not passionate, but you get it. Like maybe other founders don't, given the background in finance. But you also have the founder hat. Where are you like, this is broken? So I would say LP incentives. LPs get salary and bonuses the larger the institution they're at. They are naturally incented for job protection. Give money to massive mega firm that will do 1.8x rather than give money to Tarek and Alex at Deal and give them 20 million of a 50 million seed fund because they're going to see everything of the next generation. That's risky. No, we could lose our jobs if we do that one. But let's give it to name your massive mega firm, even though the upside is way less because there's no incentive for them to. That's like one area I think is broken.
That's very interesting. I probably agree with you. I think uh, I don't know if I have kind of unique insight into this. I haven't put much thought into it. Um,
The other
it is
way that I could,
interesting.
the other way that I could ask is, Tarek, like, help me be a better investor. What could I do to be the best investor for you?
The thing I would say, and we have Alfred and Ali Rogani on the board, like they're both really great. And the measure, and this is more of a founder. It's really not about the same about VC ecosystem and all that. And this is gonna sound cliche a bit, but I truly feel like the framework is like, can this person be my first call when shit hits the fan? And I know everyone says that, but like it just doesn't tend to be true with everyone. We're lucky enough that I truly feel like I can call. I have the people on my board. I can call Ali Partovi literally anytime. And it can be something like something personal that's really shitty just happened and I'm feeling pretty down. And I can call Ali Partovi and he'll lift me up. And I think that type of and how and it just kind of boils down to trust and building a relationship that goes beyond like, hey, give me the quarterly financials and why are these like slower than we expected and why are these faster than expected. Like it goes beyond that. It goes beyond like actually digging in with the founder, understanding like the founder's motivations and actually becoming friends with them. Becoming understanding that you're like with them for the next, if in the good case, which is what the one I'm hoping for the next few decades, they're kind of family at that point. I mean, like and so to treat them like family, and family is gonna have pros and cons.
Where do you think founders go wrong when fundraising? You're an angel investor today. Where do you think they go wrong? Like I often think when they take angels, they try and squeeze angels down to their minimum check. You can get
Yeah, yeah.
Tarek in for 10, and then it's not fucking worth your time to help at all. But everyone says yes still. Massive mistake. Give fewer people more.
I see this a lot. I mean, I think probably two things. I mean, one, especially in this environment, raise too much too early, unnecessarily. Like I see these seed rounds where like, oh, we can raise two, but we can raise four. It's like, great. Why would you raise four? And just raise, and it's largely similar valuations. The valuation wouldn't scale proportionally. Obviously, as valuations scale proportionally, raise four, but um, the valuation largely is the same or scaling sublinearly. So they're kind of getting diluted extra. And it's like, okay, with 2 million, it's giving you that much runway. What is 4 million getting you more, buying you more team members? That's just a bad thing outright before you kind of figured out what you want to build, etc. And so consistently, I think in the good case scenario, these companies regret having done more because of extra dilution. The second thing that ties to angels, I think there's just a lot of need and want to go to these super angels. Like I got, the founder of $100 billion company X on my cap table, and I got this. I mean, this is great, but these people will barely ever answer your calls, and they won't be in the ground with you. So I just think more meaningful angels that are actually bought into the vision. I just feel like people don't focus on that as much.
So let's do, when I was younger, I always used to just like say, yes, you're right. I disagree with you on the raise size, and I disagree with you because, bluntly, I feel that fundamentally it's very rarely the first V1 that actually hits. Even when it does hit, the data can be slower than you think. Most often post-launch, the numbers are never as good as you think. And fundamentally, if you operate like you have 2 million, but have 4 million, yes, you'll be more dilution heavy, which sucks from a founding perspective. But the leverage that you get going into future fundraisers and the mental luxury that you have in terms of knowing if it doesn't hit the first time, you can have a second go. I would always favor the second. I would always favor the 4. As I said, it's worse for dilution, but I think for company build, it's better.
I probably agree that if you can have the mindset of a 2 million raise, even if you raise 4 million, that's the ideal outcome.
Yeah.
So I definitely agree that it's the best of both worlds. I do think that is an extremely difficult thing to do in practice. The gun to a founder's head thing is actually, I think, a pretty understated force.
Talk to me about that. I've never understood this.
When you companies, and you've seen this, like when they go, and I love this from Sequoia, the crucible moment, which is like when they go through a crucible moment, which is like you need to act and you need to do things the right way or you might die. Those are the moments where oftentimes when you go back to stories about how companies were built and how their legacies were built, are like those are the times where people went into their A game and they've just like, fueled the business to greater heights. And I think the issue with raising more is it's really hard to create this false sense of urgency without it being real. And I think, with 2 to 4, what ends up happening on average, people hire more. People get a little bit more comfortable. They feel like they have more time. When actually 2 to 4, you should hire the same team. The business is still the same. You have more money, but the business is still the same. You should hire the same team. And you still have the same amount of time. Your biggest problem, I mean, sure, maybe might be runway, but like your biggest problem is basically, again, figuring out what you want to build. And you should do that as fast as humanly possible, no matter what. So the more constraints you basically put on yourself, the more you can put yourself in a situation where you can actually like be in those crucible moments. And I'll give you an example, like Airbnb in 2020 went through a crucible moment when, COVID basically slashed their revenue, I mean, literally slashed their revenue to nada. Um, and they came out of this a significantly more efficient company with a bigger TAM. I mean, just like ripping through kind of like that moment. And it was definitely, I mean, they had to fire, I think I forgot, but I think it was like 25% of their team, and they had to do a bunch of restructuring, cut a bunch of business lines that were kind of working but not really working. It's like, they got suddenly imposed a bunch of constraints, and they're like, if we don't figure this out right now, we may not be the company that we want to be. And look at Airbnb.
Can I be direct, Tarek? How much money have you
Yeah,
raised?
for sure. We've raised approximately 110.
Okay, 110. It's a lot of cash. How have you stayed mentally and financially lean and constrained with, bluntly, a lot of capital injected into the company in a relatively short amount of time?
It's a great question. We So here's what I would say. Luan and I have a scarcity mentality. Like we know, like it's really quite simple. We just don't really consider that we raised that much. It's just, we in our minds, we basically raised much less. We have, like a certain roadmap for 2 years. We basically cap our burn very, very aggressively. Like everyone around us says, oh, you're not growing aggressively enough. You're not growing the team aggressively enough. And we're like, no, no, no. This is how much we're burning a month, and this is the number of side of the team. And I think we do have like I would say pretty hard discipline around being like around burn and being frugal. I think it comes a little bit from this kind of immigrant mindset where you're kind of always worried that things are going to shift and like money is not going to be there for long and all these different things. So I don't know if this is kind of like a super amazing answer, but I think it's working. Um, and
Can I ask, you,
like the only negative is basically mostly like the only negative is you get more pressure from everyone around you, from the team, from investors. Like, you have all this money, why are you not spending more? Like, you get that pressure of like, you're being too cheap or too frugal, and it's like, fine, I'd rather be frugal and cheap than overspend.
is that what you meant when you said gun to your head? And help me understand as a VC, does that originate from us? Is this our fault?
No, I think the gun to the head is a good thing, and I mean, I could it from VCs somehow, but I don't think that's the most. I don't know. I don't think that's the most powerful gun in some sense. I mean, the more powerful gun is like if you have one chip on your shoulder, so that you have very high motivation and ambition to make this thing succeed. You need, as you said, you need to make this succeed. You don't want to make this succeed. Two, you have a circumstance that is endangering number one, and endangering it imminently. So that it's pushing you to act with a very large sense of urgency pretty consistently, right? And I think those two together is basically a gun to your head. Now, there are some founders that have it intrinsically. One example that I always think about is Travis from Uber.
Huh.
I mean, that guy could raise $100 billion. He would like he's just wired in a way that he has a sense of urgency. The gun is always to his head. He's just like, we need to move, we need to move, we need to move, we need to move. Like and I think that's pretty inspiring. I admire how he built the company through variety of lenses. There's other things obviously, but yeah.
Can I ask, before we move into a quick fire, you work with some incredible people, Alfred Lin, Henry Kravis, Chuck Schwab, and this was Ali Partovi, so credit to him for this. But he said, what's been your biggest one learning from working with each of them?
That's very interesting. So probably pretty different. So Alfred is an outlier. Like, he's just really good at pushing my thinking. Um, and I got to learn that over time, and I kind of realize that now. But like, no matter what I go to Alfred with, even if it's the right decision, oftentimes it is the right decision. Alfred just basically pushes back. He's like, why? You know, he can even go all the way to say this does not make much sense. Even if he thinks it's the right decision, but he just sees the reasoning is not crisp, like super crisp and crystal clear yet. He's like, go back and go and come back. And I really like that. It's constantly this exercise of like, am I really like thinking about this extremely critically? And am I thinking about this decision, as crystal clearly as I can? And I think over time that it feels like it's kind of like a little bit like a, coaching, constant like coaching that I'm getting from Alfred. That it's pretty awesome. I've been really enjoying that. I think I'm interacted more with Kravis than Schwab, and they're actually very similar in a variety of respect. But I'll talk about Kravis real quick. Um, he's just such a deep, long-term thinker, and like we're talking like long-term for like decades. It's not talking like next 5 years. It's talking like next 30 years, and how this can evolve in the next 30 years. And I really enjoy the conversation because I go back with a refreshed sense of like long term, long term, long term. Like, when you think about it, like now, every time you go through very difficult hardship, I have like an easier time. Like, okay, how would Henry think about this? It's like zoom out pretty massively, and then imagine yourself 5 years into the future, looking back at this, and you're like, this is just like a tiny blip and a tiny challenge. Oh, there was this tiny thing that we had to do at that time, and it sucked, but and I
The
always
truth
have
is,
that perspective when I'm going through these things.
my great mentor Shat told me to like extrapolate yourself out when things seem bad and ask yourself, will I remember this in 10 years time? And
Yeah.
90% of the time you won't remember losing your CMO. It's like, oh, who were they? Sorry, I don't mean it badly, but do you know what I mean? It's not like,
Yeah, no,
oh,
yeah.
I remember that head of sales leaving. If so, please seek counseling immediately. Man, I do want to move into a quick fire. So I say a short statement and then you give me your immediate thoughts. Does that sound okay?
That sounds great.
Okay, so I'm going to be honest. I don't read. I don't have time to read. Fucking podcast. What's your favorite book and why?
Favorite book. I really like Never Split the Difference. I don't know if it's my favorite book. I mean, I like a lot of different books, but Never Split the Difference is just quite good. I like it.
Talk,
It's by negotiation.
yeah, no, I've got it. I haven't read it. The joys I get sent books, and they look really intellectual on my mantle. What's your biggest strength and what's your biggest weakness, Tarek?
think biggest strength is I can like get compulsively obsessed about anything that a next big challenge for the company that I need to solve, and I'll do whatever it takes to solve it. I just, just dig into that wall no matter what. Um, Biggest weakness, I tend to have a little bit more trouble with organization across different threads. And I try to complement myself with a team, but I'm not as good as like when it's like multiple different things and checking that the trains are running on time, which is a little bit of an operation thing. I'm a little bit less, it's less natural to me.
What's the hardest element of your role with Kalshi today?
Wow. So it's just so many things. But I would say the constant balance between company building and product building is probably one of the hardest. That
Talk to
balance is really, really difficult.
How do you think
Because
about splitting today?
I don't have great answers, but definitely dynamically and it ebbs and flows over time. But I think doing product building and staying really close to customers and really understanding kind of what we need to do next and what we need to build next and why is this, what are the kind of customers' concerns, staying very close to that is extremely crucial as a founder. I want to do it as long as humanly possible. But at the same time, like starting to establish systems and processes and defining culture and communicating culture and values consistently across the org is also very, very, very important. I honestly don't have a good answer to this. I think I still don't have good structure. I kind of dynamically and greedily try to allocate my time between the two, but I think that's been a challenge.
If you could be CEO of any other company, what would it be and why?
uh, Public, private, anything.
Anything, baby.
I'd like to be a CEO of an airline. Uh, It's heavily regulated. There's a lot of interesting things to be done there. Innovation is really hard because of how regulated it is. I just like these types of businesses where like you have to really deeply think about how you can innovate within a number of sets of constraints. And it's a pretty tough, low margin business. Um, just seems pretty exciting.
Are you nuts?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
No, I love it, Tarek. I was just like, that would be a nightmare. It's like that's the hardest to go into. Low margin, low MPS, shit regulatory service. Anyway, totally with you. Tell me, what angel investor has been the most value add to you?
Oh, I can't. Everyone's been. I mean, I can't. There's just been like a lot of them. A lot of them have been absolutely phenomenal. I mean, you know, um, Ron Conway, just outlier, incredible. Henry Kravis, super helpful. Justin Mateen,
What can I ask? I've never worked with Ron. What makes Ron so good?
he just fights for you. He doesn't just hustle for you. He fights for you, and I think that's rare. He'll just and it's not just about the economic incentive and what the ownership is, or like he'll just fight for you. He wants he believes in the mission. He believes in the vision. He's like, I'm going to put myself on the front line, and you're a portfolio company, and I'm going to be in the arena. I think when you go into the arena, that's a different level. That's a different level of help.
I love that. What do you know now that you wish you'd known when you started Kalshi?
Oh, dude.
A
Uh,
lot.
well, there's some things that I say I wish I knew, but I think it was positive that I didn't. Like I could, easily I say I would wished I knew how difficult that whole the regulatory path, because regulators are like great at their job. They're doing it right. They're doing cautiously, but like how difficult the industry is. How some of the bigger players can be monopolistic. I say I wish I knew, but like actually I'm happy that I didn't, because that pushed me to basically get to where I am. It's a good thing. I mean, but I really the one thing I'd say is like most people that look amazing and have done amazing things and look, they have it all figured out. Authority figures, whether it's the president of the United States to CEO of Tesla. I mean, I don't to any kind of, they don't have it as figured out as you think. They stumbled upon a bunch of different things, and they just have a high ambition, high grade, but like they're like you actually. They're like you. It's mostly they're very similar. They have their insecurities. They have all these, and I wish I knew that earlier on. It's like you trust the authority figures, but you realize that actually, you can do anything with enough grit and enough intellect in this world. I think that's
I
pretty cool.
I agree. I totally agree. Tell me, what would you most like to change about the world of startups?
I don't know. I mean, I was discussing this with two of my good friends. I don't know if you've ever met Benjamin Yu from Trial Spark and Diesel Peltz. Um, uh, was also founder of amazing investor. So, but we're talking about this. I don't know. There's this weird shift that's been in the last decade where you see. I mean, before that, you felt like a very strong, like you admired founder. Like there's a very strong passion for what they were building. When you think about, obviously Sergey and Larry with Google, even Zuck with Facebook, they just were obsessed with what they were building, etc. I just feel like the ecosystem has turned a bit too financial. A lot of founders just like, very quickly like trying to like, I don't know. I mean, I think you get my point, but like there's just like less passion towards what they're building. There's a lot of like, oh, let me raise a quick, like a monstrous round really quickly, and try to kind of uh, exit very quickly. These types of, I don't know. I just feel like there's less passion and less kind of commitment to what they're building because the startup ecosystem has gone too mainstream. I think everyone now is founder and gets funded, etc. Whereas before, you really needed to want it to be part of this. So maybe that's I think bringing back the whole like check on like, do you really want this? This is a tough path. It's not a 2 year long path. So maybe
Listen,
that's it.
I agree, and that's what I think hopefully will change in the next few years. When tourists realize that it sucks not to be able to raise money and it sucks not to be able to fund companies, and there is shit in this business. Tell me, final one, Kalshi, 5 years time, it's 2027. We're back on the show. Where's Kalshi then?
So I think we look a little bit like the New York Stock Exchange, where you think about trading on events, you come to Kalshi, and whether you're trading it via your brokerage account that's integrated on Kalshi, you're trading it via API, and you're a fund that's basically providing liquidity or trading across Kalshi and other assets, or you're someone that's just coming straight up to our app and trading events all across the board. But I 2027, I think really about it like as event contracts becoming something that's as mainstream as crypto or stocks today, and people talk about it as if it's not. It's like a boring utility at that point, not new innovation, cool thing.
Tarek, I can't thank you enough for putting up with my prying questions. I know we went totally off schedule, but I loved it. You're a star, and thank you so much for joining me today, my friend.
Thanks for having me. This was awesome.